السلام عليكم نحمده ونصلي على رسول النبي الكريم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام عليك يا سيد المرسلين يا خاتم النبيين يا شفيع المذنبين يا أنيس الغريبين يا رحمة للعالمين صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. We've been talking about the Khilafa of Sayyidina Ali, Karamallahu Wajh, and last week we kind of wrapped up a little bit with the Battle of Siffin, and we started talking about and actually gave an overview of the Battle of Nahwan. And I'm not going into, or rather I'm skipping over a lot of details because people get bogged down in some of the details without understanding the overall picture of what's going on. The details come later. And so, I'm gonna go reiterate some aspects of the Battle of Nahwan today with some other details with that. But before I do that, are there any questions from last week? Okay, inshallah. So if you remember from last week, as far as the Battle of Nahwan, we gave the background to the battle. And the background to the battle is related to the time after the Battle of Hunayn, when Rasulullah ﷺ is distributing the spoils of war. And along with that, he's also giving these extravagant gifts to the people who had just become Muslim, to the leaders of Quraysh, mainly to the leaders of Quraysh who had just become Muslim. And so one of those soldiers who was given a share of a normal soldier felt cheated because he didn't get an exorbitant gift. And so he comes and he complains, but he complains in such a way that he's accusing Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam of being unjust. Because that's the way he complained, was he said, "Oh Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam," instead of saying Ya Rasulullah. So he says, "Oh Muhammad, be just," which of course implies that Rasulullah is being unjust, which is an impossibility. And so, and this I'm going to come back to. But the aspect of the battle that, or part of the aspects of the battle that I want to cover first, before we come back to this, because this will kind of take us into different subjects. If you remember, when Ali radiallahu is going for the battle, so he's taking his army, and all of these people that he's going to fight are people that basically left his army. So these are people who were traitors to Ali. They were initially in his army, and then they felt like, they accused Ali radiallahu of wrongdoing for something that they themselves had done, which was to lay down the weapons and to agree to arbitration. So they're accusing him of agreeing to arbitration, which of course, is in the Quran. But they said, there's no arbitration because their slogan is La hukmu illa lillah, that there is no authority except for Allah. Or there is no judge except for Allah. And this is why Ali radiallahu, when they would say this slogan, he said, Kalamatul haq wa yuriduhul batil, that what they're saying is the truth, or the statement is true, but the implications or the meanings that they are taking from this is a lie. And so when he's going, again, he's taking his army against this army of 5,000. On the way there, he's passing by the temple, like we mentioned last time. And the priest at the temple is an astrologer. not an astronomer, but an astrologer. But this, you have to remember, that this is a time when astrology and astronomy were intertwined. And so he says to Ali, he says that please don't go, because he liked Ali. He says, please don't go because the star of the Muslims is not out, and you will lose. So Ali asked him some questions about the stars, and he named certain stars. And at the end of this part of the discussion, because Ali first asked me, he said, do you know about the stars? And he said, yes. You know, he's a PhD in stars at that time. You know, or rather, he's an expert in the stars. So he says, yes. So he starts asking about various stars, and he says, I've never heard of those stars. So he says, well, you don't know about the stars, so let me ask you about the earth. And he asked him about the movements of the earth, and he couldn't answer that. So then he says to him, he says, look, everything that I do under the direction of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he has already told me that not even 10 of my men will be martyred, and not even 10 of their men will survive. This aspect of the hadith, that not even 10 will survive and not even 10 of his will be martyred, is in Sahih Muslim. So it's not a statement that anybody actually disputes. So now the question that comes up here, though, is that most of us don't think about is, how did Ali know? And there is a saying amongst the Sufia that the faqir does not say anything that he has not seen. Because, you know, you read the Quran, and in Surah Baqarah, verse number 260 is where Ibrahim al-Islam is asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how do you give life and death? Of course, this was part of the argument that he used against Namrud, that my Lord, he gives life and death. So Namrud said, well, let me show you. He says he makes the sun rise from the east and set in the west. You do it from the other side. So, but he's asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how do you do this? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do you not believe? He says, yes, I believe, but I want to see. You know, in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions Aynul Yaqeen. You know, the yaqeen that is seen. You know, so, you know, like they say here, seeing is believing. Of course, perfect seeing is believing. Because you can see things that aren't there, and, you know, it doesn't really matter. And delusional people see things all the time, and, you know, in fact, you know, most of the world is delusional at this time. So how does Ali know all of this? Of course, all of his knowledge is through Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But if you remember when Makkah was conquered, and at the time Makkah is conquered, the Kaaba is surrounded with 360 idols. One idol for every day. And you had idols inside of the Kaaba. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam directs Abu Bakr and Umar radiallahu anhuma to clean up the idols outside of the Kaaba. So they're busy cleaning. Because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam went around before this saying that the truth has come and falsehood is vanished. And all of these idols, as he's walking around saying this and pointing to each one, they all fall. So now Abu Bakr and Umar are having the men and themselves carry these away and discard them. But when it came to cleaning the inside of the Kaaba, Rasulullah himself goes in there, and along with him he takes Ali radiallahu anhu. And the Ali that he takes, because there are some, I don't know, people come up with strange things. And they always want to detract from the status of Ahlul Bayt. So there's one guy that was running around, and then eventually he said, no, I was wrong. But after he spread this quite a bit, that, oh, this wasn't that Ali. It wasn't Ali bin Abi Talib. It was Ali bin Al-As, bin Abu Al-As, you know, the other, a grandson of Rasulullah from his oldest daughter, who at that time was a young boy. And it's very clear and evident that it wasn't. And the references he was giving for that weren't references of any decent scholars anyway. So it is Ali bin Abi Talib who enters the Kaaba with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And from a metaphorical standpoint, we have to look at the Kaaba like the heart of the Muslims. It is our Qibla. It is the heart of the Muslims. So the cleaning of the inside of the heart is being done by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam along with Ali karamallahu wajh. And so they're cleaning all of these idols out from the inside, but they're also idols that are high, at a higher level. And if you remember, when Quraysh rebuilt the Kaaba, when Rasulullah was 25 or 35, depending on the historian, they raised the Kaaba higher than it was during the time of Ibrahim alayhi salam. They made it shorter, but they raised the walls higher. So you have these idols that are up in the corners that you normally can't just reach. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he tells Ali to climb on his shoulders and pull those down. And Ali says, Ya Rasulullah, so how can I climb on you? You get on my shoulders. And Rasulullah insists, no, you get on my shoulders and then you pull them down. And so Ali gets on the shoulders of Rasulullah and he pulls down these idols. But he says about that moment, he says at that moment, if I had wanted to, I could have touched the stars. When he was asked about this later on, he says, if I wanted to, I could have touched the stars. Because also at that moment, not only could he how could he touch the stars if he's not seeing them? It means he's seeing them. He's seeing those stars that we still haven't had the light come to us yet. This is why he's able to ask that person the questions of and name these various stars that person who's an expert in the stars didn't even know about. So that's one aspect of this that most of us, when we read it or when we hear about it, unfortunately most of us don't even know about it, but when those of us who do read it and hear it, we never think about it. Everything that we know should make us question, should raise more and more questions. And that's the way things should work. Unfortunately, with most of us, we learn one thing and then we think, oh, we know everything. So again, this is the maqam of Ali. This is his status because of his connection to Rasulullah. He is the door to the city of knowledge. And there is no attaining true knowledge without going through that door. But as we mentioned last week, after the battle, and exactly as Rasulullah has said, that not even 10 of Ali Radhi's men were martyrs, and not even 10 of their men survived. And then Ali Radhi has his men go and look for, because Rasulullah had given the description of one of their leaders whose arms were defective. The skin on the arms was kind of very soft skin. And his skin in general was defective. And he had described him, so he told them. And so Ali had described this man to his people, that this is their leader. And this is another point that we'll come back to. So when he goes, when the people went, and he said, go and look for them, and they couldn't find them because everything's red. So then he himself goes and he finds him, he pulls him out from underneath the other bodies, and he raises him up so that everybody can see that nothing that comes from the lips of Rasulullah can ever be wrong. Exactly as Rasulullah had described him was the way he was. So now his men came to him. Some of his men came to Ali, and they said to him, "Oh Ali, you have annihilated, you have destroyed, you have completely finished off all of the Khawarij." Because this is what they were. Again, these are points that when we come back. He said, "You have destroyed, you have finished the Khawarij, period." And he said, "No." He said, "No," because they are in the wombs of women and in the loins of men, and they will be here until the last day. These kinds of people will be here until the end. And what happens from this is, if you remember, initially this was a group of about 20,000 men, all of whom were Qurra of the time. So Qurra at that time meant, that they were Hafiz of Quran and that they were scholars of the time. So not only did they memorize the Quran, but they knew the language in and out. They knew how, they knew various hadiths. And they knew all of this, they had all of this knowledge, but all of that knowledge did them no good. So there were 20,000 of them initially, but when Ali radiallahu sent Ibn Abbas radiallahu to go and reason with them, 4,000 of them said, "Oh, we're wrong, we're going to come back into the army of Ali." 11,000 of them roughly said, we're not against Ali, nor are we with him, so we're going to go back home. And these 5,000 remained and said, "No, we're going to fight." So now what happens after he took this step against them, because they're killing people, innocent people, and anyone who praised Ali they would kill. They're doing all of these things, so he had to take these steps, and they're killing the Muslims. And this is one of the descriptions that Rasulullah ﷺ gave of these people, is that they will kill the Muslims. They will do takfir, which means that they will declare people kafir, and then they will kill them. And this should, as I'm saying this should remind people, or light bulbs should be going off as to people that we see today. So when he takes this step, and exactly as Rasulullah ﷺ had really ordered him to do, he finishes them, this 5,000. Now what you have is those 11,000 who went back home, and some of those 4,000 who came back into his army. Now they're saying, "Oh, why'd you do it like this? Why'd you get rid of why did you kill all of them? You could have done this, you could have done that." And so now they start propaganda again against Ali. Because even though physically they may have separated themselves from this other group, the mindset never changed. The reality of the mindset, of the ideology and the ego never changed. Because these are all people who are saying that Ali is kafir, and they are the true Muslim, and everybody else is kafir. Anyone who doesn't agree with them exactly the way they believe, "Oh, you're kafir." So everybody's kafir except for them. Which, what is that? That's ego. Just like Shaitan, why didn't he bow or prostrate? Because of his ego. And these are literally the followers of Shaitan. So we'll see this, and so exactly as Ali radiallahu said, no, they're going to be here until the end. And if you look throughout history, their names have changed, but their ideology and their methodology pretty much remains the same. You get little tweaks, and even at that time you had differences even amongst them. And we'll see this, later on, especially, I guess, at the beginning of Banu Umayyah. And you start noticing, okay, they have differences with each other, But it's also interesting that even with those differences amongst each other, when it comes to fighting against the truth, they all get together. You know, just like Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said about kufr in general, al-kufru millah wahida. Because kufr, disbelief, when it comes to acting against belief, they all get together. They all form a coalition, and they all come after the believers. And again, all of these things are things that, if we open our eyes, we should be seeing in the world today. And if we look at even history, we see that repeatedly. Coming back to, I guess, the origins or the statement of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So the hadith is in Sahih Muslim, hadith number 2333 for those who want to look it up. Ali radhiyallahu anhu narrates this, and this hadith is in Sahih Muslim, but then you have so many others that basically are saying the same thing that are in Bukhari, in all the other books of hadith, even the ones that people think are obscure books of hadith, they're all in there, in the main books and in all these other books. But the one I'm referring to is from Sahih Muslim. Ali radhiyallahu anhu narrates this to his men as they were going to the Battle of Siffin. And the purpose behind him narrating at that time was he was telling his men that, look, our real enemy isn't the one that we're going to fight now. It's the one that we got to fight when we get back. So he says that Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam told me that from amongst his ummah will come a people who will recite the Quran in such a way that so he's here, we're specifically talking about Ali in this narration, but if you look at all the other narrations, Omar and Khalid and Walid radiallahu anhuma, those two at least were there, and there were some other companions there too. So he's telling them all that they will recite the Quran in such a way that you will be ashamed of your recitation. But it will not get below their collarbones. And I'm reiterating things we mentioned last week, but I need this, to kind of move forward. But it will not get below their collarbones. And they will think that it will testify for them on the day of judgment, but in reality it will testify against them. And your salat will seem insignificant to their salat, and your fasting will seem insignificant to their fasting. And if the people knew how much reward I would give to them for fighting against such a people, they would think that that action of theirs is enough to enter into paradise. And then he says to Ali, and you will fight against them. And this is what he said, and you will fight against them, and not even 10 of your men will be martyred, and not even 10 of theirs will survive. And this is why when you look at the Battle of the Camel, and you look at the Battle of Siffin, at the end of the battle, or at the end of the fighting every day, and because Siffin was a little longer, Ali radhiyallahu would also make Salatul Janazah for those who were killed on the other side, as well as those who were killed on his side. But in this battle he did not, because Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says in this same hadith, he says that when he says that if the people knew, he says right before he says if the people knew how much reward I would give them, he says that when he says, after he says that that your fasting will seem insignificant to their fasting, he says, and they will pass through Islam like an arrow through its prey. And you will see no blood on the tip, no blood on the shaft, and no blood on the feathers on the end. Because normally when you shoot an arrow through the prey, you at least see some blood. But here there's nothing. Meaning they will go through Islam, even though they in appearance will seem so pious. And this is the problem with most of us, is somebody's in a position of authority and he appears pious, and we don't, then we're not looking at, okay, what's his mindset? what's his ideology. We don't care about any of that. He just, he recites Quran so well, and he prays so much, and he fasts so much, and he must be, he must be a confirmed Jannati. But that's not how it works. Here Rasulullah is telling us these people who in appearance will appear so pious, but they will have attained nothing from Islam, from the religion. Because that's what he said. He says, pass through prey pass through the prey, Islam through an arrow, like an arrow through its prey. And the other interesting, and he says, and he uses the words kharij. They will exit Islam, and this is where the name comes from. This is why they became known as the Khawarij, which is plural for, kharij. So, but they will go through it and attain nothing from it. From the reality of Islam, they will have gained nothing. Even though, again, they aren't just praying regular prayers. They aren't just praying the 5-time prayers. They're making tahajjud, they're doing everything else. They aren't just fasting in Ramadan, because he's telling Ali radiallahu anhu that you will be ashamed of your actions when you look at their actions. They're like, I'm not doing enough. And Ali radiallahu anhu used to fast a lot. He used to pray. He was famous for praying a lot. And his recitation of the Quran, amongst the companions, he's number one. Then you have Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, and then you have Ubay bin Ka'b, radiallahu anhu. And again, Rasulullah is telling him that you'll be ashamed.
I'll ask you a question.
Yes.
What does make them different with that?
Yeah, no, I'm coming to that. Yeah, I'm coming to that. So the question is, what makes them different? They're doing all the same things, but what makes them different? So we'll come to that. Okay. I'm kind of moving backwards right now. Because that's a very important point and that's really the main point to understand here. Is, if we don't understand what makes them different, then how do we differentiate who's who? Right? Just like, a lot of people say, only talk about the good. Well, and don't criticize anybody. That's fine if everybody is good. But that's not the way Islam works. That's not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught us, because right at the beginning, he says, when you recite the Quran, what do? A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. I seek refuge with Allah. He didn't say simply stop there. You don't say A'udhu Billah and stop. You specify also, the enemy. Just like in Surah Fatiha, when we say Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, Allah, guide us through the straight path. But then we specify Sirat al-ladhina an'amta alayhim. But then we don't even stop here. Oh Allah, the path of those who have earned your favor. We could have stopped. We could have technically stopped there. No. Then we specify غَيْرِ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ. Not the path of those, who have earned your anger and who have gone astray. So again, we have to know the difference. And so, because these days, the thing is, and this is something that was put forward mainly by those people who become exposed when you start talking about these differences. And this is why these hadiths, even though these hadiths are in basically all 6 of the books, chronological, the main 6 books of hadith, plus they're in Mustadrak and Abu Ya'la and Ibn Shayba, and just the list goes on and on and on. But if you talk to most people, they've never heard of these hadiths. But when we look at all the other hadiths, Rasulullah also, he says that they will do takfir, they will call people kafir, who are Muslim, and they will kill the Muslims, they will kill the believers. Okay. So now what makes them different? Because again, I look at their appearance, I look at their actions, and it all conforms. So the origins of them, when did Rasulullah SAW tell this to Ali RA? When did he say this to Umar RA? When did he say this to Khalid bin Walid? And this is where we come back to the Battle of Hunayn, and when Rasulullah SAW is distributing the spoils of war, as I mentioned earlier. And then you have one of them, because he feels cheated. He didn't get this exorbitant gift that was given to all these others, because Abu Sufyan and his two sons, each one of them got 100 camels plus 40 ounces of silver. You have Safwan bin Umayyah, who at this time wasn't even Muslim. Rasulullah SAW gives him the whole land, the whole property that all of these spoils of war are being kept on, which is 24,000 camels, 40,000 goats and sheep, all of these prisoners. The prisoners he let go. Rasulullah SAW freed them, and that also gets into part of this as well. The reason the prisoners were all freed is because amongst the prisoners after this battle was Bibi Halima as-Sadiya, the one who had nursed Rasulullah, along with her daughter, who used to sing songs to Rasulullah when he was a baby. So these two were also amongst the prisoners. And so their people came to Rasulullah, said, Ya Rasulullah, these are amongst the prisoners. We would expect good from anybody, but we expect more from you. So he says to them, you come back tomorrow and everybody is present, and you will see what I do. So they came back and they said, Ya Rasulullah, what about the prisoners? So Rasulullah said that I, on my behalf and on the behalf of Banu Hashim, Banu Muttalib, I free those prisoners that come into our lot. The Muhajirun, the Muhajirin, those who had immigrated, they stood up and they said, Ya Rasulullah, because of your love, we free our prisoners as well. The Ansar stood up and said, Ya Rasulullah, because of you, we free our prisoners as well. And then when this happens, then all the other tribes start standing up, except for the tribes of Najd. So Najd, you have to remember, Hijaz is Western Arabia, so that is the area around Makkah, Medina, Taif. That area is all Hijaz. Okay. Najd is Eastern Arabia, the center of which is modern-day Riyadh. So if you remember the Battle of Yamama against Musaylima the liar, that took place just north, basically just on the northern edge of modern-day Riyadh. That was Yamama. Okay. And this area, this whole area, was known as Najd. So you have the tribes from Najd who said, we're not giving up our prisoners. So Rasulullah made a deal with them that in the next battle you will receive 5 to 6 times more. And then they said, okay, then we give it up. Everybody else is giving up their prisoners for the love of Rasulullah, and these people wanted to only gave up their prisoners when they were given some wealth in place of the prisoners. Okay. So all of these people are being given all of these exorbitant gifts, and this is also interesting, and I'll bring this up now. When Rasulullah, before he distributed the spoils normally, he was giving all of these exorbitant gifts. So word spreads very quickly, and because of this, there were people who were still confused. Because if you remember Quraysh's argument against one of their main arguments against him was that this is kingship. He just wants to become the king. This was one of their arguments against him. He just wants to be a king. This is why they tried to bribe him so many times. Well, when he's giving like this, they started realizing kings don't give like this. King, when he gives something, and the same thing, unfortunately, with our situation too. When we give, we're also looking, okay, what do I have left? I don't want to give too much. But Rasulullah is giving, he's just giving. And so now they start realizing this is not how kings give. And so word spreads very quickly that Rasulullah ﷺ gives so much, without fearing becoming poor. He just gives. So now you have people coming, Ya Rasulullah ﷺ, I need this. Ya Rasulullah ﷺ, please give me this. And whatever they're asking, he's giving. One man, a Bedouin, he came. And he says to Rasulullah ﷺ, he says, Ya Rasulullah ﷺ, he says, I need you to fulfill my need. Ali, rather as the narrator, he is there. And he says, when this is said to him, suddenly, there's that aspect of Jalal that comes over Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he says to the man, he says, ask whatever you want and it will be given to you. And Ali, he says that I was so envious of that person at that moment. Because I knew that he says, I just knew that he would ask for everything in this world and the next and it would be given to him. And so then the man, he says, in true Bedouin form, he says, Ya Rasulullah, I need 4 sheep and a camel and a couple of this and a couple of that. That's it. So now, the Jalal settles, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he tells Ali, he says, go and get him what he wants. But he says to the man, he says, you have asked me for less than what the old woman asked from Musa alayhi salam. In order to understand this, we have to understand what the old woman asked from Musa alayhi salam. But the other aspect that we have to understand also is that you ask according to the status of the person that you're asking. And this is the way it should work. So if I go, to a guy off the street and I say, can you loan me $1? Well, because I don't think he has much, so maybe he can loan me $1, right? If I go to someone who I know, is a billionaire, I don't go and ask him for $1. I mean, I should ask him according to what he should be able to give. Like if we were collecting donations for something, the people who don't have much, I expect them not to give much. But the people who have more, I expect them to give more. And of course, that is also what sets Abu Bakr apart from everybody else, is because at the time of Tabuk, Umar, he had plenty of wealth. He brought half of it, and he left half for the family. When Rasulullah asked him, what did you bring and what did you leave? He said, Ya Rasulullah, I brought half and I left half. Abu Bakr brought everything he had, but everything he had was in his 2 arms. That's all he had. And that included his shirt and his clothes. And everything he had was less than 50% of what Umar had. But it was what he gave. It was everything. And this is when Rasulullah asked of him, he says, what did you bring and what did you leave? He said, Ya Rasulullah, I brought everything and I left Allah and His Messenger sallallahu for my family. So again, if I'm asking a common man, I don't ask for much because I don't expect him to have much, right? If I'm asking someone who, is at a very high level, then I should ask for more. So this is why Rasulullah says, he says, you asked me for less than what the old woman asked from Musa alayhi salam. So now we look at what did the old woman ask from Musa alayhi salam. When Musa alayhi salam is commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to take Bani Israel out, it's what is known as the Exodus. So when he's taking the children of Israel out of Egypt, he's also commanded at that moment to also take the body of Yusuf alayhi salam. Because if you remember, Yusuf al-Islam was one of the leaders in Misr, in Egypt, and he was buried there. The problem was that it had been such a long time, no one knew where his grave was, except for one old woman. She's the only one who knew. Musa al-Islam is ordered to go and ask her, where is the grave? Now here there's another important point to understand. None of the followers of a prophet know more than the prophet. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given the knowledge to Musa al-Islam, but he also wants to teach the people the status of this old woman. So he orders Musa al-Islam, he says, go and ask the woman. Because he wants to show the understanding of this old woman. So when Musa al-Islam comes to her, he says, you know, you're the only one who's left who knows, and I'm commanded to ask you to take this body with us, to take the body of Yusuf, to take Yusuf al-Islam with us. So she asked Musa al-Islam, she said, what will you give me? You know, knowledge is not free. You know, comes with a price. So what will you give me? So he says, what do you want? You know, I'm commanded to ask you, so obviously, you know, whatever you ask, I will give it to you. So she says to him, she says, I want Jannah. And not just any part of Jannah. I want to be in Jannah where you are in Jannah. You know, because, you know, you have, you know, the pious, they have their level, and then you have, you know, above them the, you know, the Shuhada, and then the Siddiq, and then the Anbiya, then the prophets. Jannatul Firdaus, yeah, right. Rasulullah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So she says, I don't want just any part of Jannah. I want to be in Jannah where you're going to be in Jannah. So now Musa al-Islam, you know, how can I do this? So of course Musa al-Islam is Kalimullah, he's the one who speaks to Allah. So he says, Ya Allah, this is what she's asking. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, give it to her. Which also shows us that he's given authority to Musa al-Islam. He says, give it to her. He says, yeah, but Ya Allah. He says, how can I give this to her? You know, common old woman, she's going to be at one level in Jannah, and, you know, the prophet's at a different level, then how can I give this to her? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, well, with the prophets will be those who will serve them, and who will be connected to them, and who love them. So give it to her. So this is what Rasulullah is referring to. He says, you asked me for less. It was the right of Rasulullah that he should have been asked for more than what the old woman asked for Musa al-Islam. That Bedouin, if he understood, then he should have asked for Rasulullah for Jannah, and not just any Jannah, but Jannah at the level of Rasulullah. He said, you asked me for less than what the old woman asked for Musa al-Islam.
So he could have it? Or
Not now. Too late.
No, but at the beginning he could ask for it.
He could have asked for that. Because the statement here is that Rasulullah said, ask me for whatever you want, it will be given to you. Right? He could have asked, but he didn't ask. And this is why Ali said, you know, he says, I was so envious of that man at that moment. Because if he had asked, you know, because I was just sure. Because if Ali was given this, I mean, Ali was Ali, he would have asked. But the Badawi, he said, I need some goats and some sheep and a camel. You know. Okay. Anyway. So in all of this, and amongst all of this that is going on, when Rasulullah divides the spoils of war amongst the soldiers, amongst whom is Zul Khuwaisra. Okay, so he's one of these soldiers. He gets a share. Okay. The share is nowhere close to what Abu Sufyan got, what even the person who led the army against Rasulullah Malik bin Anas, if I remember correctly his name. He was the leader he is the one who formed this coalition against Rasulullah. When he saw his army losing, he ran off. Rasulullah sent word to him. He says, tell him to come and see me. And whatever has been taken from him will be given to him, plus 100 camels on top of that. He comes running. And there was no condition on this. Rasulullah didn't place a condition that he comes and he accepts Islam and then it will be given. He just comes and sees me. He comes, the Rasulullah gives him, and then he accepts Islam. Zul Khuwaisar, who had fought in the battle, in the army of Rasulullah against the enemy, but he only got a certain portion, a small portion. What in his eyes was a small portion. All right. So he comes and he says to Rasulullah, "O Muhammad." He doesn't even have the decency to say, "Ya Rasulullah." You can't find any place in any hadith where any of the companions, including the wives of Rasulullah, address him by his name. Even in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us the adab of Rasulullah. He never addresses the Rasulullah by his name. This is the love Allah has for his Habib. He's addressed all the other prophets by their names in the Quran. Ya Musa, Ya Yahya. But whenever it comes to Rasulullah, whatever condition he is in, Ya ayyuhal muddathir, Ya ayyuhal muzammir, Ya ayyuhal nabi. Always. This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showing us, teaching us the maqam of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this guy has the audacity to come and say, "O Muhammad, Ya Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam." He says, "Do justice." And Rasulullah responds to him and he says that if I do not do justice, who can do justice? And if I don't do justice, then you will all be destroyed. And then he has the audacity to turn around and just walk off. Give his back to Rasulullah and just walk off. And this is when Umar radhiyallahu pulls out his sword and Khalid radhiyallahu pulls out his sword, and then there are others there. Of course, Umar radhiyallahu is Umar. So he says, "Ya Rasulullah, give me permission." And as we mentioned last week, if he asked for permission because the Rasulullah is there, so out of adab, he is asking for permission. Otherwise, he would have just taken care of him. And this is when Rasulullah says no. He says no. Because the people will say that Muhammad kills his own. Because these people who had just come into Islam, they couldn't differentiate at this point. And so all they're going to see, and the propaganda from the hypocrites will start immediately. And they will, look, he's killing his own people. So he says, no, the people will say that Muhammad kills his own. And then he says to him, take a good look at this man. Because, and when they described him, shaven head, sunken in eyes, thick beard. And then in other descriptions also, his, I guess, trousers or pajama or whatever was high. His shirt was long. And then this is when Rasulullah says to them, he says, because from him and those associated with him will come a people who will recite the Quran in such a way that you will be ashamed of your recitation. They will, but it will not get below their collarbones and all the rest of what we had talked about before. Then the whole hadith comes into play, talking about the Khawarij. Okay. So if I look at the people in Nahwan, the ones that Ali radhiyallahu fought against. So the issue here is, what did Zul Khuwaisra do? Umar radhiyallahu during his Khilafa, a man came to him and said, Ittaqullah, fear Allah. And the companions of Umar are upset that this man, this is the Khalifa of the Muslims, what are you saying? And Umar radiallahu anh calms them down. He says, no, this is his duty to remind me to fear Allah, and it is my duty to listen to him. Because Umar radiallahu anh is Umar, he is not Rasulullah. There is a possibility that Umar could maybe at a moment not fear Allah. The possibility is there. And so this man is reminding Umar, there is a possibility that Umar radiallahu anh could make an incorrect judgment. And there were 2 times when he did, well, Ali radiallahu anh is the one who corrected him. And this is why Umar radiallahu anh used to say, لَوْلَا عَلِيٌّ فَحَلَكَ Umar. That if Ali was not there, Umar would have been destroyed. There is no possibility of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam being unjust or doing injustice. So this man comes, he's disrespectful to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam after knowing who he is. You know, it's one thing, okay, like for a disbeliever, well, they don't believe in him as the prophet. So they say things, they do things, and the door is still open for them. Perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them hidayah and they will come into Islam, which will be their tawbah from all of these things that they did. And we see this throughout history. And we see this today as well. You know, like, was that the politician that was Norway or wherever he was from, I forget where he's from.
I think from Amsterdam, then.
Yeah.
The mayor of Amsterdam.
Oh, he was like a big time politician, very vocally against Islam, a leader of the non-Islamic, the anti-Islamic party basically. And what happens? You know, he takes a few days off, he takes 3 years off because he wants to write a book against Islam, and what happens? He becomes Muslim. Right?
The one with the 7 head on?
Yes, that guy. So we see this. But for someone who knows who Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is, and then they're disrespectful to him, the door is already shut now. Okay. And we see this also. Why was Abu Sufyan given hidayah and Abu Jahl wasn't? Because when I look at it superficially, there were things that Abu Sufyan did that Abu Jahl didn't even do. Okay. Because if I look at the background to both of them, Abu Jahl had absolutely no doubt who Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is. Abu Sufyan, even up till the end, had some doubt. And we know this from the statement of Abbas radiallahu anh, because when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is entering Makkah with the army, with the 10,000 army that came, Abbas radiallahu anh took Abu Sufyan, because they were friends before Islam, up on the mountain to see this procession come in. And Abu Sufyan says to Abbas, he says that your nephew has become the king of the Arabs. And this is when Abbas radiallahu anh says to him, he says, you still don't get this. This has nothing to do with kingship. Of course, then eventually he got it. So he becomes radiallahu anhu. But that is what saved him, that doubt. Because otherwise, if he didn't have any doubt and he did the things against Rasulullah that he did, then he would have ended up like Abu Jahl. This is why when we look at Surah Adab, Surah Hujurat, and we've talked about this before, when we look at that, which is Surah number 49, when we look at that Surah, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us the adab of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the first verse, A'udhu billahi min shaitanir rajim, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. Again, starts off with, oh, you who believe. Who are the believers? The ones who have accepted Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why is he teaching us the adab? He's making sure that we don't slip. Because if we slip, then the other aspect of that also comes into play. So, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, la tuqaddimu bayna yaday Allahi wa rasuli wattaqullah, inna Allah samiyun alim. O you who believe, put not yourselves before Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but fear Allah, For Allah is He who hears and knows. Alright? And then يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا ترفعوا أصواتكم فوق صوت النبي ولا تجهروا له بالقول كجهر بعضكم لبعض أن تحبط أعمالكم وأنتم لا تشعرون. O you who believe, raise not your voices above the voice of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, nor speak aloud to him like you speak to one another. Which also applies to us, that we don't speak about him like we speak about anybody else. Even when we speak about him, that adab has to be in place. But then the warning comes. And the warning is what? أَن تَحْبَتَ أَعْمَالُكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَشْعُرُونَ. Lest your deeds that your deeds are destroyed, they're washed away, and you don't even know it. Which means what? Which means you can't even do tawbah. Because to do tawbah, you have to acknowledge you've made a mistake. So this is a line where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just drawing this line because, for those of us who know who He is, if we cross that line, there's no coming back. Just like the Khawarij, they crossed the line. They went through the Islam like an arrow through its prey. They were disrespectful to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And here, not only like in the Battle of Nahwan, when Ali radhiyallahu anhu deals with them, not all 5,000 of them had been disrespectful to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam directly, but they all sided with the one who was. And this is also when we look at this description, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says to the companions, he said, take a good look at this man. So he's telling us certain things here. Why is he telling them take a look at him? Why would he say that? Other than it means something. Take a look at him, know him. And then the description that the companions give. So, and then also when we know his name, Zul Khuwaisra at-Tamimi al-Najdi. His name is Zul Khuwaisra. He's from the tribe of Banu Tamim, from Najd. Okay. And he says to his companions, he says, because from him and those who associate with him will come these people. So now when I look at it historically, like I said, those tribes of Najd who when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passes, who are the ones who apostated immediately? The people from Najd. Basically, the people of Hijaz, Makkah, Medina, and Taif were the only ones who didn't apostate, pretty much, as a group. You had individuals who didn't, but as a group, all the other places apostated. And amongst the tribes of Najd that were so prominent tribes was Banu Tamim and Banu Hanifa, okay, which is the tribe of the liar Musaylima Kadhab. So that's his tribe, Banu Hanif. Okay, so he's from that tribe. So when I look at this name, and then I start looking at things historically, Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab at-Tamimi al-Najdi. If I look at all of the grand muftis of the Saudi kingdom, because they're all from that family, they are all, if you look at Abdul Aziz bin Baz at-Tamimi al-Najdi. Now these people, what they do is they'll bring up the hadith of Rasulullah saying, oh, no, see, Rasulullah said that Banu Tamim, there will be people from Banu Tamim who will be the most aggressive or fight against Dajjal the most aggressively, which is also true. And the way you have to understand that is, if I look at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's from what clan, what tribe? Quraysh. Who fought against him, most rigorously? The people of Quraysh, right? If they had accepted Islam right away, all of Arabia would have fallen into line. But they fought against him until, it was so overwhelming that they had no other choice. Right? If I look at the history of Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, right, who fought against him the hardest? His brother, Sulaiman bin Abdul Wahhab, and his father, Abdul Wahhab. In fact, they formed an army to fight against him, but he had the support of Muhammad bin Saud and that army, so he defeated his brother, and his brother even wrote a book against him that he's bringing in to Islam. He is pushing things as Islam that are not Islam. Yeah. If I look at their description to begin with, one of the things that they would do whenever they would go into an area, if you look at them historically, is they would force all of the men and women to shave their head. Because they said, oh, you're all kafir, you're grave worshippers, you're all kafir, and the reason they would say you have to shave your head is because this is the hair from kufr, the time of kufr, so you have to get rid of everything of kufr. They kept doing that until one of the women objected and said, well, then you also have to shave your beards. They don't want to shave their beards. So you also have to shave your beards. So again, if you read the description of Zul Khuwaisra, shaved head, thick beard. Long, thick beard.
So he was the one leader of all the 5,000 people?
Those who associated with him, the same mindset. You know, those who, you know, basically if I look at things today, these are the same people who, when I talk about Rasulullah, when we praise Rasulullah, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordered us to praise him, they say, oh, you're doing ghulu. You know, you're praising him too much. They have, issues with that. And then they want to, they'll bring the hadith where Rasulullah said, do not praise me in excess like the Christians praised Isa alayhi salam. Which is true. But it's a conditional statement. You know, it's sort of like, and the example I like to give is like when Jafar, when he was like 3 or 4, he was eating cereal, on the dastakhan, on the table spread, on the floor, and he dropped some of the cereal. So he gets down on all 4, and he's eating the cereal like this, and he says to me, I'm eating it like a goat. So my response to him is, don't eat your cereal like a goat. That didn't mean don't eat your cereal, but I'm specifying how not to eat your cereal. Okay? So I said, don't eat your cereal. So if somebody says, oh, you told them don't eat the cereal, that's not what I said. I said, don't eat your cereal like a goat. Okay? The Rasulullah said, don't praise me like the Christians praised Isa alayhi salam. How did the Christians praise Isa alayhi salam? They assigned to him divinity. They made him a god. They made him a son of God. There is no Muslim who says Muhammadur Rasulullah, who says Rasulullah is part of divinity or part of God. Alright? Just like, there's the other statement where he says to the companions, because he one day, he walks in, they all stood up, and then he sits down, and then he says to them, do not stand for me like the Ajami stand for their king. Again, it's a conditional statement. So they say, he said, don't stand for him. That's not what he said. He said, don't stand for me like the Ajami stand for their kings. How did the Ajamis mean here, meaning the Persians and the Romans? How did they stand for their kings? They stood for, what would happen is the king comes in, they would all be standing, the king would sit down, they would still be standing, until finally he would tell them, if you order them to sit down, otherwise they remain standing. Alright? So when we look at with Rasulullah, what would happen? He would go to his daughter's house. Everyone accepts this hadith. He goes to his daughter's house. She would stand for him. He would kiss her on the forehead, and then she would have him sit where she was sitting. When she would come to his house, bi Fatima salamullah alayha, he would stand for her, and he would kiss her on the forehead, and he would have her sit where he was sitting. So she didn't know that she wasn't supposed to stand for him? Of course she knew. But she also knew how to stand for him. And we see this also. Whenever he would come, they would stand, and they would sit with him. Which is also funny because one time when my dad was in Pakistan, and one of my uncles wanted to take him to this guy who he thought was all this, this scholar, he's so knowledgeable and all of this stuff. And this was one of those guys who said, oh, don't stand for Rasulullah. So he took half the hadith, and that was his Islam. But the funny thing was, my father went. He said, well, if you insist, you went. So they're waiting for Salat, and the guy entered the masjid. When he entered the masjid, everybody in there stood up for him. Everybody stood up for him. And then, eventually he makes his way up front and, sits down, and, then, Adhan is called, and then they make the Salat. It was Maghrib Salat. And the reason that's so funny is this guy is telling everybody, don't stand for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But when people stood for him, he had no problem with that. And all these people listening to him didn't question standing for him. These are the same people when we talk about the knowledge of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then these are the people that not only say, but they literally write stuff. That, he didn't know what was on the other side of the wall. Or he didn't know what was on his back. Which again is disrespectful to the knowledge of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is disrespectful to him. It challenges also the hadith and what we know from the Quran. When we talk about his authority, they literally write stuff like, he didn't have the authority to break a twig in two. Now, what's all funny about this is if I praise their scholars, he's so knowledgeable and this and that, they don't have any problems with that. But when I start talking about, when I start praising the knowledge of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then they want to immediately jump in and say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him that knowledge. Who else gave him the knowledge? Of course we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the knowledge. Then why don't you specify that when you talk about your scholar? Then they don't specify that at all. Everybody knows Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the knowledge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who gave him the authority. But then they want to say, no, he didn't have the authority to even break the twig in two. And again, they aren't even just saying, they're writing this stuff now. Or they'll write stuff like, modern day stuff. That the Rawda of Rasulullah shouldn't be in the masjid. This is shirk. And we should, and inshallah, we will take it out soon. And these aren't just anybody saying this. These are like what are considered by some people to be mainstream scholars, but considered by them to be their scholars. But again, when you look at them, they have all of the dressings of piety. But then when you look at their attitude toward Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when you look at their attitude toward Ahlul Bayt, they're always trying to lower, especially when it comes to Ahlul Bayt. Sometimes they can't, and they realize, okay, we can't say this about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so we'll just say this about Ahlul Bayt. So they want to lower that status. And this is where you start seeing the differences. This is the difference. Is the adab of Rasulullah, the acknowledgement that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given him the knowledge, and not just what we think of knowledge. There is not a question that I could even, that all of the rest of creation could think of, except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already given Rasulullah that knowledge. There is no authority that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not given to Rasulullah except when it comes to forgiving those who are disrespectful to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is, since I just mentioned that, I'll go over this in the last few minutes. Surah Munafiqun. Let's see. verse 5, and the whole surah, the title of the surah, it's not a very long surah, Surah Munafiqun, the hypocrites. Okay. The verse 5 starts off with أعوذ بالله من الشيطان وإذا قيل لهم لا وإذا قيل لهم تعالوا يستغفر لكم رسول الله لووا رؤوسهم ورأيتهم يسدون وهم مستكبرون. And when it is said to them, come, the messenger of Allah will pray for your forgiveness, they turn aside their heads, and thou would see them turning away their faces in arrogance. And so the background to this verse, and then we get to the warning. This is when the companions, they were coming from Banu Mustalaq, Abdullah ibn Ubay, who's the leader of the hypocrites, created an issue, and I won't go into the details of that right now because there's not time. He created an issue. Okay. And then he met amongst his people because, and an issue that came up between the Ansar and the immigrants, the Muhajir. And he says to his people, he says that you are the ones who created this by letting them into our houses, by letting them in to our city. Because Abdullah ibn Ubay was going to become the king of Medina before Rasulullah arrived. They had already made a crown for him. And so when Rasulullah comes, well, who's going to be king in front of him? No one. Again, ego. He lost his position. All right. So he felt spited. So he says to his people, he says, you're the ones who caused this by letting them in. Mm-hmm. And when we go back to Medina, we will see that the honored one will kick out the dishonored ones, meaning that we will kick out Rasulullah and the Muslims, even though he's claiming to be Muslim. All right. And this was Zayd bin Arqam. He overheard this. He was 14 at that time. And he comes telling Rasulullah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals the verses because Umar wants to go and take his head off. And other people say, no, he just misheard it. He's a young boy, he misheard it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends these verses defending the position of Zayd bin Arqam. No, he heard what he heard, and he heard it correctly, and this is what they're saying. All right? So he exposes them. And it's mentioned in other parts, but I don't have time to go over that right now. Inshallah, next week we'll go over this in a little bit in more detail. Just remind me if I forget. But the warning comes. سواء عليهم أستغفرت لهم أم لم تستغفر لهم لن يغفر الله لهم إن الله لا يهدي القوم الفاسقين. And it is equal to them whether thou praise. Okay. Coming back to this. So he did this, and then when they come back. And of course, on the way back, they create the issue against Aisha radiallahu anha. And so then he, eventually, when things are settling and people are coming and asking for forgiveness and they're being forgiven, they go to him. The people go to him and say, you come and ask Rasulullah to pray for your forgiveness and Allah will forgive you. So his response to them is, he says that, I have, I've accepted Islam because of him. I give zakat because of him, which is a big deal because his wealth is going away. I give zakat because of him. Now does he want that I should come and prostrate myself to him, bow to him? This is arrogant. And then he turns away in arrogance and walked off. This was his attitude. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the warning, he says that for such people, it is equal to them. Whether thou pray for their forgiveness or you don't pray for their forgiveness, Allah will never forgive them. Truly, Allah guides not the rebellious transgressors. But why won't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive these people? Because they are disrespectful to Rasulullah. It comes back to, because Rasulullah is rahmatul lil alameen. He would ask for their forgiveness. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, no. Because of you, because who they're disrespectful to, I'm not forgiving them. Doesn't matter whether you ask or you don't ask. These people will not be forgiven because they are disrespectful to, it's like, you have someone you love. Someone comes and slaps them. And the one that you love says, I forgive you. Are you going to also forgive him? No. You're going to say, oh, you slapped the one I love. It's hard for us to understand these things because we don't understand the concept of love in general, unfortunately. Most of us, But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is Habibullah. He is the beloved of Allah, and in that, should speak volumes to us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not only the one who loves him, but he is also the one who created him. He created his own beloved. So do we think that he's going to put any shortcomings or any faults in the one that he's created as his beloved? So those people who find shortcomings and faults with him, and then claim to be Muslim, that becomes a big issue. And that is what distinguishes, those true believers from those who are claiming faith. But that also, like the other characteristics that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us of them. One of them is what? He said they will do takfir. They will call everybody kafir. And they will kill the believers. If you look at the history of these groups, of all of these militant groups that follow that ideology, who do they kill? Who are they bombing? You rarely, if any, see them go against anyone who's not Muslim. To the extent that they go into the masjids and bomb people. And then they claim to be Muslim. And again, the names have changed, but the ideologies and the actions have not. And if we continue to ignore this, that's our problem. And this is why we see the condition of the Ummah like we see it now. Even with everything that is going on in Philistine. I mean, just the open, brutal massacre that is going on in Philistine. And you have all of these so-called Muslim countries getting together, and they can't make any decision. They get together, oh yeah, they shouldn't be doing that. I mean, lip service. Absolutely nothing. Because they are also part of that problem. And if you look at the ideology that these certain governments specifically propagate, because when you go to Hajj, what do? What language do you speak? 20 books in that language. All of that is talking all of that. Oh, you don't need to go to Medina Munawwara. Your Hajj is accepted if you just, come to Mecca. Well, I mean, yeah, technically that's true, but for the lover, that doesn't apply. And they keep hounding these points. So again, the problem though is because we've become lovers of the dunya, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has, sealed our hearts as well. I've gone over a few minutes. We'll come back to this next week, inshallah. Those who were here last week, I reiterated a lot of points, but I needed to in order to kind of move forward a little bit and to kind of go into a little bit more detail, inshallah. There's no time for questions today, so we'll start off next time with the questions. If you have any, write them down so you remember. Inshallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, help us and guide us and make us understand. And may He, give strength and protection to our brothers and sisters in Palestine and those in Kashmir and everywhere that the Muslims are being oppressed. May He accept those who are being butchered as martyrs. And may He allow us to help them in any and every way that we can. And may He also, because this is a harder test for us than it is really for them, they are passing their test, and may He allow us to pass our test as well. وصلى الله تعالى على خير خلقه محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم
Go to a on Sunday sometime or no?
No, we don't.
Sunday closed.
Sundays, some people on First Shift volunteer.
Oh, they work.
Yeah, like come in 4 o'clock and get over 12, 100.
Okay.
Some people on First Shift, they